Okay, so yesterday we had initially started talking about interest groups and talking about the things that they do, the four things that they engage in. We'd started focusing on number one of those four issues, which is lobbying, discussed what lobbying is, and then we got to this slide here about how to lobby. And I think we finished talking yesterday about, that you have to register to be a lobbyist, right? Lobbyists are individuals that are sent by those interest groups to government to engage with legislators and to talk to them, and the governments require that you register so they know that you're a representative of a particular interest group, and you're not there on your own personal representation as a citizen. Once you're in the position of lobbying, we've talked a little bit already about the main thing that's going on here is that as a lobbyist, your job is to provide information. Your job is to get the best information supporting your side of a particular issue in front of decision makers and to convince them that that's an important thing to pay attention to. The information that you've generated is useful, it's on point, it supports the topic well, it explains why a piece of policy should go a certain direction or a different direction. And it should be information that legislator can rely on as accurate and useful. Although certainly biased to a certain side, it should be accurate and useful. And this is going to be happening from all of the lobbyists. And then, of course, we'll have individual citizens bringing their position in as well. That is the primary role, day in and day out, of a lobbyist that's working for an interest group, right, is to get information about that interest group's main issues in front of decision makers. The rest of these 4 points are things that they do in it, as well as provide information. They're important, they're useful, but they're all secondary to the role of providing information. These next 2 both deal with strategy. One is political strategy, one is campaign strategy, so I need to make sure we understand the difference. Lobbyists will, with the support of their interest group, provide political strategy or help with political strategy in trying to get a piece of legislation passed. Right, so political strategy is working on a bill, working on legislation, working on one of those perspectives, one of those goals that you have, policy goals that you have as an interest group. So political strategy here is once you have some legislators that are on board with the decision you want to be made, the way you want it made, they're going to be trying to figure out how the best way to get this piece of legislation passed is out there. And so they're going to be talking to other legislators. They're going to be talking to their party. They're going to be talking across the aisle to the other party. And they're going to get a political lay of the land pretty quick. Now, you as a lobbyist for an interest group will be talking to all these people, as many people as will talk to you. And you'll have a little bit of an idea of the lay of the land also. The political strategy part of it is figuring out what you and the legislators that are pushing the policy the way you want, what you need, what that policy needs to be successful. Are there certain other legislators that you need to bring into the mix, that you need to get support for? Is there more information that needs to be researched and brought up? Does it need to be shared with somebody? So the political strategy that we're talking about here is a strategy that needs to be put into place to ensure the policy that you want as an interest group passes, right, and becomes legislation. becomes law. So you might be having conversations with legislators, and they'll say, "Look, these two legislators over there are amenable to voting for this, but they need more information. Go set up a meeting with those two folks so that they can get comfortable with the issues and can get comfortable with the information." That's political strategy because, right, you're talking about how you can expand the uh, arena of people that are supporting what you want and try to get that piece of legislation passed. So, as an interest group and as the lobbyist in particular, you're going to be helping the legislators that have decided to work with you and for that goal any way they need. That's, wherever you can help them, you will. If they say, right, go give information to them, they'll do that. If they say, go talk to them about another bill that they're going to want support on, and maybe if you can support that, that would help them support this one, a little bit of back scratching, then you go do that, right? Whatever it is that you can do to help move the situation forward for your interest group. That's political strategy, right? It's all focused on passing the legislation. Campaign strategy is strategy that revolves around political campaigns, not around legislation, but around getting people elected or helping people stay in office if they've already been elected. So you're out there generating contacts with these Congress folks, right? You're giving them information. Y'all are working on legislation. Perhaps some of these politicians become consistent supporters of what your interest group is wanting, right? And they're folks as an interest group count on being there when you bring new ideas, concerns, or needs to them, right? Y'all have got a good working relationship. When that's the case, you're going to want to make sure as an interest group that you do all you can to help with the campaigns, political campaigns of these politicians and getting them reelected office. Once you've got a door in government open, once you know people in government that are making decisions and you can call them up and you can talk to them, that is about as good as you can get besides getting the actual policy you want. You need to protect that as an interest group. You need to keep ensuring that those folks who see life goals, yes, those folks who see things the same way you do stay in office. And so you're going to take, as an interest group, you're going to take some of your resources and you're going to help those candidates with their campaigns. And this can be a lot of different things that you can do, right? As an interest group, you can send out information to your membership saying, look, if you live in this state, in this district, this U.S. House member is up for reelection, and they have been a stalwart, right, in supporting the policies that we as an interest group want. So if you're living in their district as a member of this interest group, you need to support them for reelection because they're voting the way you want them to vote. Right? We're telling you that this are people that we want to get reelected office. So vote for them. Donate money to their campaigns. Donate your time to their campaigns. Do whatever you can within the legal bounds, right, to support the campaigns of these folks that are already supporting our position. Now, at the national level, the interest group can also work on helping the campaign, right? Not just trying to get their members to support that candidate, but they can also help that candidate's campaign. As an interest group, they can donate money. They can organize their folks to work for the campaign. What you will see more often as a voter watching TV during a campaign season will be political advertising that will be generated in support of a position, and through that position, the candidate that supports that position. And so you will see people, right, interest groups, putting out political advertising. And as long as that political advertising is definable as an educational advertisement. In other words, you're advertising, you're educating the electorate on a policy issue. As an interest group, you can spend as much money as you have and want on that campaign. Right? You're not donating the money to the campaign directly. You're spending money on behalf of your issues and ideas that campaign also supports. And so you have an unlimited, the ability to donate an unlimited amount of money to education about that campaign, about the policies in that campaign, about the candidate in that campaign. You just have to do it without any interaction or coordination with the candidate. Right? If the candidate or their campaign staff are guiding you, the interest group, to put this ad out there, then that ad has to be counted as a donation to the campaign. And there are strict federal limits on how much money you can donate to a campaign. But if you do this on your own without their blessing and or their help, and it's demonstrably educational about the issue, as an interest group, that's free speech. And you can spend as much money generating those campaign ads on that issue as you want. So an interest group, right, will create what is called a political action committee. That political action committee, right, is the funnel for information and strategy and money into political campaigns. That political action committee will donate the maximum amount allowed by law to a candidate or to a bunch of candidates, and then they'll organize and develop and put out political advertising that they're paying for themselves that go through or from the politicians themselves. This gives interest groups an awful lot of impact because it opens up the banks for them to spend the money as much as they want. Notice this is strategy, right? Spending money, putting out education, putting out ads on campaigns, right? Which is different from the previous topic of political strategy, which is focused on legislation. These two make sense? The next idea here is that lobbyists, interest groups in general, but lobbyists in particular, also provide a source of ideas for people that are in government. When legislation is being written, when a new issue is being worked up to be turned into legislation, you'll often have a problem without a solution. You'll know that as a legislator, you'll know that there needs to be some legislation done, but you're not exactly sure what. Interest groups with their research staff and their money and their expertise on topics can provide ideas about solutions, about ways of approaching new legislation. And so you might actually see the government, in the sense of legislators, reaching out to interest groups to say, hey, we've got this problem that we need to fix. You're going to be a player in this at some point or another as we propose a solution. If you got any thoughts on this now or eyes on this now that could help us get to a good solution that you could support, now would be a good time to share that with us, right? So we did this quite a bit when I was working in the bureaucracy here in Austin, here in Texas. New legislation, and this is a little beyond, right, but new legislation would already have been passed, telling the bureaucracy what we needed to do X, whatever X might be. That legislation would require us to write new administrative rules about how we were going to do X. Before we would start that process of writing rules, we would quite often put a few phone calls out to interest groups that we knew were going to be impacted by this legislation to ask them, we know you're aware that this is passed. We know that you know it's going to impact you. What would you prefer to see from us, the bureaucracy, going forward as we implement this so that it makes the least impact on you while still delivering what the law requires? Right? So you give them an opportunity to come forth and bring ideas and concerns into the deliberation at the front end. And so those interest groups will engage immediately, right? And they'll say, okay, so the law passed and maybe we don't like the law. Maybe the law is not good for us as an interest group, but it's law now and it's got to be implemented. We understand that. Here's how it would be the least problematic for how we do business or what we want, right? Now, that's a source of ideas for the bureaucracy because anything that they can do, right, to implement the law effectively and correctly, but cause as few problems as possible, they should, right? And so giving these groups, interest groups, an opportunity to engage early in the process means that when you get to implementing a solution that's going to make the law work, you're going to have fewer folks being a public obstacle to the implementation. And you might actually get some really good ideas that make everybody meet the goals of the legislation, don't hamper, interfere, or cause an issue with the interest groups out there. So it's not unusual for government to open the door to interest groups to provide information and ideas about how to do things, right? You just get more heads involved, get more people focusing on what's going forward. The law has already been passed. It's already going to happen. It's just figuring out exactly how you're going to do it the best way. Does that make sense? The last one's a little odd, but if you think about it a little bit, it makes more sense, and that's the friendship angle. Lobbyists and legislators have a lot in common. They're doing a lot of the same things. They're both representing people, right? The lobbyist is representing their interest group that they work for. The legislator is obviously representing the people that voted them and their constituents in office. They're both concerned with impacting legislation so that they get done what they need to get done. They both believe in a democratic process and an interaction discussion of ideas. And so throw into all of that kind of work in the same direction a lot of times. They're also working together a lot, not just the same direction, but together. When bills are being worked up, when bills are being talked about in committee, when bills are being rewritten, or parts are being added or fixed or excised, they're all working that together, right? That's happening. You're putting as a lobbyist your information in to get this to happen. You got the legislator saying, we're thinking about going this way. Do you see a problem with that? Right. Over time, right, just like you have work friends, this is the development of a relationship of work friends, right? Those lobbyists are around, not just for the legislative session, but for years, right? Session after session, working the same general ideas in the same topical areas time after time. And so are those legislators. Those legislators get elected, they get appointed to committees that are focused on whatever the topic is, and that happens to be the same topic those lobbyists are working on. These people are constantly interacting with one another. And they, when you work together, you develop relationships, and they do too. Right? You work for a few hours on an issue, you have a few committees, you dismiss for lunch, and you all end up eating lunch at the same place. Or you get a lobbyist that says, "Hey, let me take you out to lunch." Right? And this has happened more than one time, the legislator staff, the agency staff are burning the midnight oil working on issues and working on legislation. The lobbyist knows that, and they're like, "Man, I know they're still in the office. It's 10 o'clock at night. I'm going to have a couple of pizzas dropped off. I just, let them know we know they're still there and we appreciate their work." And, and as lobbyists and as legislators, a lot of them are away from home at the same time, right? So you're a legislator from California and you've got to go to Washington. You're there for 2 or 3 weeks in a row. These lobbyists might be from out of state also, and they're in DC for 2, 3 weeks in a row, right? You keep the same hours, you do the same work, right? You're around each other all the time. It's normal for them to develop personal relationships that help them get their job done. Not only that, but also consider that a large number of lobbyists, right? Those folks that are working for the interest groups, that are in the working with the legislators closely, those lobbyists, a lot of them are hired to be lobbyists after they quit working in government, right? After they quit working in the bureaucracy, after they quit working in the legislature, they quit working on the staff of the legislator. They are a retired legislator, right? And interest groups will come around and say, "Hey, so your career as a politician or as a bureaucrat is done, but you still got all of this knowledge and you still got all your contacts. You want to work for us?" Right? And so a lot of times you'll see legislators leave government and go to work as lobbyists. Well, when an ex-legislator who is now a lobbyist goes back into the halls of the Congress and are trying to talk to current legislators, they all know each other. They were legislators at the same time. They served together. They know each other. They voted on the same thing. So now, as a lobbyist and an ex-legislator, I'm calling up a current legislator saying, "Hey, Bob, this is Russ. I want to come by and talk to you about this piece of legislation you're sponsoring." What's Bob going to say? "Absolutely. Come on over. Let's have lunch." Right? We've worked together as legislators, and now you're a lobbyist? Cool. Come tell me about what's going on. I've worked with that interest group a lot. Right? The friendship there is normal. It lasts over time, and it's useful. Right? It's part of the lobbying process. And it's genuine, right? It's not just a friendship for expedience sake. I mean, everybody understands the same thing. They understand the process. They understand what you give up to do this kind of work, right? They understand the hours and the panic, right, that comes in as you're trying to get stuff done on deadline and you're working together. So friendship develops here, right? And that's you couldn't put a price on that if you're an interest group who has a lobbyist that's able to cultivate friendships like that, right? Yes? Questions? All right, let's move forward. So we talked about the first idea, which is lobbying and what that means. The second thing from the interest group's perspective that they're going to be involved in is electioneering. And electioneering is right, that part that we talked about under lobbying where you're doing campaign strategy. Although this is not from the lobbyist perspective, this is from the agent or for the interest group's perspective as a whole, right? As an interest group, you're going to listen to your lobbyists come back and say, "Hey, we need to get involved in this campaign strategy." At that point, the interest group as a whole has to gear up to aid candidates running for election or running for re-election. And the most obvious place this is going to happen. I'm sorry, Andrea. How much do they work? Lobbyists? They work as much as legislators, which means 6 or 7 in the morning till whenever they get done at night. Usually they work 10 or 12-hour days. It depends. When legislature is in session, they're there. When legislature's not in session, they won't necessarily be there. So if you're talking about the U.S. Congress, then you're going to be there a good 9 months out of the year. If you're talking about Texas, you're going to be there for 140 days out of every 2 years, right? Because we only have a legislative session beginning of odd number of years. But when session is in, you're working. There'll be other stuff to do right outside that as well that will take up your time. But that's, as a lobbyist, that's your main focus. I'll tell you, as a bureaucrat that's worked downtown in Austin on legislation, I've had to show up down there at 7 in the morning and left at 1 or 2 a.m. in the next morning. As the session gets toward the end of a session, it's about to close down. That becomes fairly standard practice for the last 2 or 3 weeks of the session. You're putting in, 18, 19, 20-hour days, and 7 days a week at that point. Because the sun is on a deadline. It closes down on a certain date at a certain time, and you've got tons of work to get done between now and then. As a legislator, you're working on all of it. As a lobbyist, you're going to be whenever anything that you're working on is involved, and that's going to be a lot of that time. So it's not a job for the faint-hearted or the clock watchers, right? You got to be into it. You got to enjoy it. You got to want to get in the middle of it and mix it up, and work it hard, right? I know as a bureaucrat's perspective, right? When we work those kind of hours, we start getting what's called time and a half, right? We get, for every hour we work, we get paid for an hour and a half because we're well over overtime. However, most of the time we get paid that, we get it in time off, right? Paid time off, but still time off. So if you work, right, 60 hours in a week, you're going to get 20 hours extra, which is going to get you 30 hours of paid vacation time. That's nice, but you don't get to take it whenever you want to get to take it. And so there are people working in state agencies here that their job is to help the legislators through the legislative session. Legislative research, legislative attorneys, things like that work for legislative arm there. And during a legislative session, they will accrue so much time and a half. When the session closes in June, so right, we're going to have a Texas session open in January of 21. It'll run through the middle of June of 21. Those folks that work that will have so much time off that they have to take before the end of August, which is the end of the fiscal year, that quite often they take off from the middle of June through the end of August. Not because, I mean, well, they've worked so much those first 6 months out of the year that they're going to have to use that time before the end of the year, or they lose it. And their agency is not going to pay them for it. They're going to make them take it. So you'll see groups of people that are off all summer, basically, but that's because they've worked so much before the summer that that's what evens it out. Right? That's how much they work. It's now, I was not in a position like that where I do that, and even I was still able to get a lot of time off because of that. At one point, I was carrying in excess of 2,000 hours of paid time because of what the work required, working with the legislator. So interest group lobbyists and interest groups that are helping them out, they're going to be working those same hours, right? That bureaucrats do and legislators do. And it's amazing the amount of effort that has to go into making that session work. It's probably not quite as much at the federal level because they have sessions running one after another. They don't stop for a year and a half like Texas does, which puts a real emphasis on getting everything done now in Texas. So there's efforts, right, to do work in one session, propose the legislation in another session, right, and spread that work and that out over time. But that's not the way it works in Texas. And as a lobbyist, you will be working, right, wherever the interest group needs you with whatever government they need you to work with, whether that's a local government, state government, or federal government. So, and then as your candidates, as we're looking at here, your candidates for office, the legislators that have been working with you come up for reelection, it's time to work on their election campaigns, right? Which is a lot of time and effort there, right? So the interest group's going to be mobilizing their finances, they're going to be mobilizing their membership, and they're going to be making sure their political action committees are out there building ads and supporting campaigns and working with candidates. And that's going to be, right, a lot of work all at one time as you close out a political campaign. Now, the thing here is, of course, for electioneering is that once an interest group finds the legislator or legislators that are on their side, they want to keep them there. That we've already talked about and that we understand. The other side of it is, though, is that quite often there are other legislators that don't, right, help, that are not on their side, that don't see the things the way they do. And so you're going to be trying to ensure that their opposition gets elected. And sometimes you're going to be in a really odd position of knowing that the opposition you're supporting is probably not going to win. And this candidate that's already in office is probably going to get reelected. And you might find yourself as an interest group in the odd position of supporting both campaigns. Now, why would you do that? Why would you support both campaigns as an interest group? Any ideas? None? Remember, your primary goal as an interest group is to get the policy you want. Maybe, right? They may not, though. One candidate may not be supporting your side. Why would you still support them? You would still support them because they're in office and you want to be able to talk to them. Even if they disagree with you right now, and even if they disagree with you on this particular piece of legislation, the next piece of legislation may be different. It may still impact you. You want to keep the lines of communication open with as many people as possible in the legislature. So your political action committee for your interest group is going to cultivate relationships across the aisle with all of the legislators if they can, as many as they can, and with as many candidates for office, because the main thing they want is to be able to get their information in front of these decision makers. Even if those decision makers are possibly hostile to their position, you still want them to look at your information. You still want them to consider your position. Are you going to change their mind? Doubtful, but maybe. But part of your job as a lobbyist, as an interest group, is to keep that door open to the decision makers. And you're going to try to be as helpful as you can be, even to ones that aren't necessarily on your side, because you never know when they might be on your side, when you might have the opportunity to get in front of them again. So what you'll see quite often, if you're looking at campaign contributions from interest groups, political action committees, you will see that they donate to both candidates, right? The legislator that's in office running for re-election and their competition. Usually the way they do that is say maximum they can donate is $5,000 or something like that. I forget the number every now and then. It might be 7,500 now. But anyway, there's a limit they can donate directly to a candidate. They'll usually donate the maximum amount they can to the candidate, to the legislator that's in office. They'll donate a substantial but smaller amount of money to the competitor. That way, regardless of whoever wins the election, they can call them up after the election and say, hey, this is so and so from this interest group. We supported your campaign to get into office or to stay in office, whatever the case will be, and we'd like the opportunity to talk to you about X. So even if they're not both supporting your beliefs, you may still support both of them because you want to open doors. You want to keep doors open for information so that you can get in front of these people. And so when you look at campaign contributions, I did this not too long ago. It is kind of public relations. I did this when 2 years ago when we had Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke running for U.S. Senator here in Texas, and I was surprised at the number of campaign contributions from the same interest groups to both candidates. Right, so you could just, because all of these campaign donations are public information, you can look them up. And you'd see the same group donating money to both candidates. And what they were doing was, keeping their foot in the door, basically, or trying to open the door for a candidate. So either way, it was good relations to make sure that they kept the door open and could always go talk to whoever got into office. Exactly. Don't put an egg in every basket, and some will make it through. And smart interest groups, are paying attention to these campaigns, and trying to make sure that they keep opportunities open for their interest, for their lobbyists to get in there and make their case. So again, they give financial aid, they motivate their membership, to vote and to maybe work as volunteers for political candidates. And then they're out there as political action committees, putting information out as well as supporting campaigns with money themselves. So electioneering is an awful lot of what they do just to keep relevant. Any questions about that? We'll move on to litigation. Now, these first two things we've talked about there, the lobbying and the electioneering, that's where interest groups want to put their time, their effort, and their money. Okay, that's all effort that's going directly where you want it on maintaining your issues, working your issues, getting legislation through, maintaining your relationships. These last two, litigation and going public, are ones that interest groups have to do occasionally, are forced into it sometimes, but seldom want to do it because it's one step removed from what they're really trying to do. It can be costly and it may not pay back as well as they need it to. So litigation is essentially what an interest group is left with when they've lost out on their policy issues. So you've been pushing for particular policy, legislation gets passed, it's not what you want. And the implementation of that policy is going to be detrimental to your cause. So now you move from a positive, trying to win a situation to trying to prevent damage, trying to stop, the damage from happening, trying to mitigate what this legislation that passed that you didn't want, what it's going to be able to do. So litigation becomes a place where you can try to, do this. And the first thing you do is you sue in courts to stop implementation of that legislation. Remember, when legislation is passed by a legislative body, it then usually transitions over to some bureaucracy, some bureaucratic group, some agency or something whose job is then to make that law happen, to implement it, right? When that happens, there's a period of time where you're taking the new legislation, do X, and you're writing a set of rules that say how you're going to do X. That process where the agency, the state agency bureaucracy is writing the rules about how to do what the law just said to do is an opportunity to get involved. One, you can try to say the legislation that was passed is not constitutional and attack the legislation in court directly. Two, you can say that the agency, the way they're implementing the new rules, is not appropriate for the law that was passed, and courts make them stop. Three, you can say that the way the results of that legislation, the way it's going to be implemented, is going to be detrimental or not intended, so stop. Right? You're going to have to go into court and prove your case to win this, which is going to be time consuming and it's going to be costly. And the odds are usually not great that you're going to be successful in court, because you got to remember that all through that legislative process, there were attorneys, right, working to make sure that none of this would be really successfully challenged in court. And so the odds of it being the case that you could go into court and knock it down are not great. But if that law, when it gets implemented, is going to just do something that's unrecoverable, something that's, you think is, as an interest group, really, really bad, then maybe you need to fight it in court. So you'll sue to prevent implementation. You'll sue for a different interpretation. Example of this is actually just is going on right now and has gone on recently with Obamacare. Right? So you had, Democrats in the House and the Senate, a Democratic president, passed the Affordable Health Care Act, became known as Obamacare. And a couple years ago, there was a lawsuit brought by an interest group saying that the individual, that the penalty on the individual mandate was unconstitutional. It was effectively a tax that hadn't been passed in the appropriate way as a tax. And it made it up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court was looking at that and said, you know what, it looks like a tax. And it wasn't described as a tax. We think that might be unconstitutional, so we're going to strike down the tax. Well, that was a victory for the interest group and all of the politicians and the folks that were on this other side, because they actually got the court to recognize as part of their argument. And so when that got struck down, while you were still required by law, if you don't have insurance through work, to purchase insurance through the healthcare initiative from the federal government, you can't be fined for not doing that now, right? And that was the point of it, because they said if you're made to pay for the tax or the insurance, or you're fined for not doing that, and if you're being taxed because you got to pay one way or the other, right? So that was a successful challenge, right? We're seeing the same thing in the election right now, right? Interest groups on behalf of political action committees on behalf of President Trump, and President Trump and his attorneys themselves, are suing in state courts prevent certification of election results, alleging that these elections are fraudulent, right? They're not constitutional. They're not correct. They didn't follow the laws in place about how to manage an election and how to count ballots and how to ensure that all of the people voting were the people they said they were. Those are the challenges that they're bringing. All of those require them to spend money. And if you're following right the media right now and all of this so far, all of those lawsuits have been thrown out, right? They've not been successful. And that's not unusual. So it's an interest group. Anytime you're going before the court to either stop implementation or change an interpretation, the odds are stacked against you, and you're spending a lot of money, and your prospects of success are slim. So interest groups don't want to do this if they don't have to. The third thing on this list is what's called amicus curiae briefs. Amicus curiae is Latin. It stands for friend of the court. Okay. I don't know if that's my connection or your connection. Okay, Lauren is hearing me fine. Colton, how are you doing? Caitlin, good for you. Andrea, I'm sorry, I think it's you. Yep, there you go. So, we're recording, so those spots that get bagged, you can go back and pick it up. The recording ought to play a lot smoother. So, an amicus curiae brief, right, a friend of the court brief, is where you're an interested party to a lawsuit, but you're not one of the parties to a lawsuit. And you're going to bring information to the court. So you file a brief on behalf or to the court on behalf of your organization as a friend of the court, saying, okay, court, you're about to make this decision on these people's issues over here. How you decide may impact us. So we want to give you some information so that you know ahead of time what your decision, if you go this way, this way, might do. And it's a way for people that are not directly in the lawsuit to have an opportunity to get information and communication into the discussion that the attorneys and the judges will have, and that the courts will take with them as to make a decision. This is not nearly as expensive or time consuming as either of the first two, where you're actually a primary partner to a lawsuit. You do still have to file things a certain way, and there are costs to filing them, and but you're basically putting yourself out there as an expert on the issue, wanting to get information into the system. You might be called by the court to come forward and explain your information, so you do have to be prepared. Right, in that sense, that doesn't often happen because most of the judges have a pretty good handle on what's going on, and with your information in the brief you give them all the information they really need. But it requires, as an interest group, that you've got attorneys paying attention to a lot of other different issues that do go to court, so that you can file these briefs and you can be a part of, at least on the periphery of what's going on. So amicus curiae briefs allow you to get your information into a court where you wouldn't have standing as an actual plaintiff, and still maybe have an informational impact on what the decision or the results are. Does that make sense? Okay, the last one here is really, really out there. It's kind of interesting, and I've seen it happen a couple times, so I wanted to bring it in. And that's interest groups are in a really unique position, especially nationwide interest groups, really big interest groups, because they have membership across the country, right? I mentioned AARP the other day, right? Huge interest group, American Association of Retired People. 28 to 30 million members in the United States to that interest group. So almost 1 out of 10 or 11 people in the United States belong to that interest group. And that interest group is getting a ton of information from their membership, right? And they're providing a lot of benefits to their membership. And what that means is that there will be times where, as an interest group, they'll see something start happening where one of their members is going to court over an issue, say in California, and then another one of their members is going to court over the same issue in Texas, and another one's going to court over the same issue in New York. And this may happen in 20 or 30 different places, 20, 30 people, right? Because they're getting all of this information, because this is their membership, they're in a position to recognize that there's a similar problem in a lot of different states, which is a lot of different court systems. And a class action lawsuit is where you see the same legal issue occurring in a lot of different places and a lot of different jurisdictions. And it makes sense to condense all of that into one lawsuit in one place and get one court case and one decision. It saves on money, saves on time, right? And it gives you one uniform legal decision that works its way out across. And interest groups are one of the few places that we see organizations have the ability to recognize when a class action lawsuit might be useful. And they have the information and the resources to pull that together. They're going to do that just to help their membership. Right? These are people that are dues-paying members of their organization, and this is an opportunity for them to pull all of this together and provide a service to them. Which, of course, right, you join an interest group because you want them working on your behalf on certain issues. So this all kind of plays together. And then, they help organize all that, push it forward. The lawsuit gets settled, however, one way or the other. But it's good for the courts because you get one decision that's, can the same, being applied the same across the country. It settles that issue at one time. So everybody kind of knows, okay, here's the answer to this. And that's good legal results. The membership gets help because they can pull all their resources, and the interest group can help organize and maybe even pay for some of that lawsuit. So it's good for them. It's good for whoever's being sued because now they've only got to defend themselves in one place instead of in 20 or 30 different places. So it saves money for everybody. So class action lawsuits can be really, really useful in that way. And I only bring it in here as a form of litigation for interest groups because they're in that unique position to recognize that their membership needs this help and that they can provide this for them. Okay, you're not going to see it an awful lot, but it is there, and it's kind of interesting tangentially. Does that make sense? All right, the last of our four main elements that interest groups engage in is going public. So remember when we started this chapter, right, I talked to you about interest groups having a primary goal and a secondary goal. Going public is a secondary, is the actions you go through to chase your secondary goal. So going public is the act of an interest group going out into the public and trying to change public opinion, trying to get people in general to see and believe things the way the interest group believes. So you've got your membership, you've got your organization, you've been trying to get laws passed, legislation passed, you're not getting there. What you're running into is that you don't have enough clout, you don't have enough support, you don't have enough people. Or your opposition has more than you do. And the legislators are paying attention to this, right? And so you've got to compete on a better level. So you have to turn away from focusing just on your primary goal, which is getting the policy you want, and you have to expend time and resources, effort on changing people's minds, on getting more people to join your cause, expanding the area of public support, political support that you have. And this is time consuming, it's expensive, you're not guaranteed you're going to be successful, right? But you've got to basically go on an education campaign to the public to try to convince them that what you're doing is good and useful, right? So you don't want to do this the same way you don't want to do legislation, because it's an awful lot of effort and it's an awful lot of money. But if you're losing continually and getting to your primary goal, you've got to change something about how you're approaching all of this so that you can be more competitive in the political arena. And so what you'll see here will be large public interest campaigns, membership campaigns, membership drives, right? Some kind of thing that's going to get your message out there and maybe change people's minds. Something that convinces folks that, oh, I need to pay attention to this interest group. They're doing good things, and maybe be a member, right? You need to do some of this all of the time just to maintain your interest group. But if you're not being successful, then you've got to actually make this change it from a secondary goal to a primary goal. That's right. Start focusing on the health and the breadth of the interest group, so that you can get big enough and have enough clout that you can turn around and get what you want done when you get back into the legislature. Pretty easy, right? To understand, this is chasing your secondary goal, which is managing the group, and you're doing that so that you can then come back successfully, hopefully, and chase your primary goal again. All right. One of the interesting things that is going on as an interest group that you're doing all the time that dovetails real nicely with the going public idea is that you have to, right, as you're chasing your primary goal, you have to keep track of how you as an interest group look, and the impact that you carry as a group, as the size of your group, and your public notoriety, right? So you've got to manage your size. You got to spend enough money to stay relevant, but not spend so much money you take away from your ability to be successful, getting what you want, because really you really want to spend your money on getting the issues you want. But you need to make sure you got that organization behind you. And so a good part of being a successful interest group is managing the size of your interest group so that it meets the needs of the group's goals. And so size is important, right? And you have to manage that one way or the other. And you do this, right, by looking at the relationship of how many people you actually have, the actual size of your group, versus how many people you could have, right, your potential group. So let's say you're working on behalf of an issue, say, like, let's do our retired people one again, right? American Association of Retired People. Your potential group is everybody that's retired, right? That's what you would gather from looking at their name. If you actually went to their website, you'd find out that to be eligible to join their group, you only have to be 50 years old, which is not retired. So their potential group is everybody that's 50 years old or older in the United States. I don't know exactly how many people that is out of our 320 million people, but it's a lot. We know that their actual group is somewhere between 28 million and 30 million people. That's a lot too. So that means they've got a lot going on here, because if your organization has 28 million people in it, that's a lot of time and effort you're going to have to, and money you're going to have to extend to manage this group, to keep these people happy with the interest group, to make them realize they're getting something good for the amount of money that they're spending, to be a member of that interest group. And so AARP's approach to this is, we want to be as big as we can be. As many people of that potential group as we can get, we want. We're going to make the barriers to joining our group really low. In other words, they don't charge much. And we're going to try to make sure we give back well in excess to our interest group what they pay to join. And that's besides working on the legislative part of things. Right? AARP is really interested. They have a huge focus on giving benefits back to their membership. So much so that a lot of people join not knowing what the political position of AARP is. They join to get the benefits. And so it's pretty amazing, right? So I'm going to kick you over here, Rick, just to show you this. Make sure y'all are seeing what I want you to see. Okay, so this is the website for AARP. Notice their membership cost, $16 a year. Right now, 12, so it's a bargain. So to be a member, the barrier is very, very low, right? And they'll give you a second free membership, and you get a magazine, and you get access to hundreds of benefits and social programs, right? You see all this stuff happening here, right? So look at some of the things that they're going to give you, right? Member savings, right? Dental savings, AT&T savings. Here's, right, savings on, right, Walgreens, prescriptions, a free hearing test, right? You need some help with your online stuff. You're worried about fraud. They got a protection network for fraud, right? You want to go travel? They got discounts on, right, where you're going to stay, right? All of these things become available to you, right? Just by joining and paying $12 or $16. You know, you go spend enough money at Carrabba's, get 15% off. You've got your annual payment paid for in savings, just eating out a couple times. So what I'm showing you here is that, right, this organization is putting a lot of effort, right, into managing their membership. And they're doing that because they know they can get these huge numbers of members, right? 28 million or so. I think it's actually closer to 30. But so they're able to, right, go out, because their group is so big, they go out all these other organizations and get discounts for them, which then turns around and motivates more people to join, keeping their group bigger, which means they can get other discounts. So a lot of people, right, join just to get the discounts. So AARP has decided to manage the size of their organization from the more is better perspective. And they're being very successful. Now imagine being a lobbyist for AARP and you show up, right, at the legislature, the Congress, and say, yeah, I'm representing AARP congressperson, and this is how, right, we want this to happen, and we've got 28 million people that are in our organization. That gets people to listen, right? That makes an impact. So they've chosen the path of maximizing their membership, right? They do that by giving them material benefits, discounts, membership benefits, things like that, things that they hand to them, basically. They give them solidarity, right, benefits, because if you go deeper into it, you'll see that in every state, in every big city of every state, they have AARP membership meetings. So you can get together with other members of the group and talk about what the group's doing for you and what you want and what legislatively you want them to do. And they organize all of that and spend time, effort, and money making it all happen. Now they're big enough, right? You get 28 million people at $12 a year. You got a lot of money to manage all this, and they spend a lot of money managing it. It also means that their lobbyist shows up with, right, a very impressive membership behind them. So when it comes time to maybe work on political strategy or campaign strategy or electioneering, it makes a difference when you say, well, we've got 28 million people in our organization. We'll try to get as many as we can that are in your area to work for you. That means something to the legislator, right? So all organizations are trying to manage the size of their group from a purpose, right? In the sense of, hey, we want you to join because you believe the same thing we believe. That's a purposeful idea where you're advancing your policy or goal. Interest groups also spend time and effort managing based on, right, building up solidarity within the group, right, getting you to invest in the other members of the group as, hey, they believe like I believe, and we should maybe hang out together. And 3, stuff that they give you, right? So even the small interest groups, right, you join them, probably going to pay more than $16 a year. You may pay $50 to $75 a year, something like that, or more. They're going to send you, a hat. They're going to send you a shopping bag. They're going to send you a quarterly newsletter or a magazine or something tangible that they can put in your hands that says, look, you spent this money joining our group, and here's part of the benefits, right? You want to know what we're doing? Well, here's our quarterly newsletter telling you where your money's going and how it's being spent and where we're being successful. All of that work, right, is besides the work of trying to get the policy you want. And it's all there trying to manage the size of that interest group. You think the interest group has got too big, cut back on material benefits, give more solidarity and purpose and stuff. People that were hanging around just for the material benefits will go away, and your system, your interest group will shrink and will be more manageable. You want to have that big number behind your lobbyist when they walk in there, then do what AARP is doing and go cheap and give a lot of free things away and get your number up there. Right? So you're working, right, trying to think as an interest group, how big do we need to be successful? How much money do we need to have in our pockets to be able to do the things we want to do? How much do we need to take out to go back and support the interest group as a whole? Right? So there's a lot going on here. And most of us don't think about it that way, but the interest groups are having to do all this, not just chase their primary goal. There's also a unique problem that interest groups have to deal with sometimes. If you're an interest group whose purpose is to get a collective good or a public good delivered, so you're an interest group that's trying to work for the good of the environment, say clean air, right? Clean air is the collective good or public good. It's something that if it's provided, everybody that breathes benefits from it, whether they're a member or not. That means, right, that's a collective good. Everybody gets it. And that's good. We want everybody to get clean air. If we're an environmental interest group working for that, we want everybody to have clean air. That's why we're doing it. The problem, of course, is that because it's not a selective benefit, it's not a benefit that we can dole out to specific people. Everybody gets it when we're successful. People that are paying attention and have a limited amount of funds may look at our organization when we're asking them to join and go, well, I believe in what your organization is trying to do. I want to help, but thinking through this a little bit, if you're successful without me, I still get the clean air. I don't have to spend money if you're going to do it anyway, right? So I think I'll just take a free ride on this one, right? I'll get to where I want to go, but I won't have to join. That's a problem as an interest group if the primary goal is a public good, because people will opt out, right? Because they're rational. They're looking at, I can still get this and not pay for it. When that happens, right, that's a threat to the interest group if enough people do it. So you have to make sure that you're giving something tangible, right, to the members that other people don't get, besides the primary goal of the organization. So a hat, a bumper sticker, right? The Audubon Society gives out a really nice coffee table book with pictures of birds, right? Because you got to be a member to get it, and bird watchers like those bird pictures, so that works for them, right? It convinces people, hey, it's the only way I can get those books, right, is to join. And yes, they'll work on preserving wetlands for birds. That's all good, right? So you've got to find something as an interest group, if you're providing a public good or a collective good, however you use the word, that's going to convince people to still give you their money and become a member. And that's the free rider problem, and it requires an interest group to come up with more solutions to managing their organization than just saying, hey, we've got a good goal, join us. Does that make sense? All right, we got one thing left, right, in this. And it's not so much something I need to talk about, it's just something I need you to remember. We talked about these three theories of democracy way back at the beginning of the semester. We talked about pluralism, right? The idea that individuals have the opportunity to get involved in the political system and make a difference, and that's a good democratic thing to have happen. And we'd like to encourage it. And then we talked about hyperpluralism, where too many people are doing it and the system experiences gridlock and slows down. And then we talked about elite theory, where it's really not about the individuals, it's about the haves and the have-nots competing over who gets what. Those theories are applicable when we talk about interest groups, because when you really look at the way democracy works, seldom is democracy the exercise of individuals getting things done. It's much more in the realm of groups, interest groups, getting involved in the political process and getting things done. These three theories are still relevant in that discussion. Are we a pluralist system in relation to interest groups? Are there opportunities for interest groups to get involved? Are there enough resources for interest groups to get involved? Can they make a difference? Can they feel like they're being, playing a good part and being successful? What happens when too many get involved? Do we have a system of grid, where it breaks down into gridlock or not, right? So these three ideas that we originally talked about in an application on an individual level need to be revived in the sense of applying them to group theory here as well, to interest group theory, right? So make sure you remember that, right, going forward. All right, that's our last slide on interest groups. And any questions? What does front loading mean? I'm going to draw a blank on that, ain't I? Most of the time we use the term front loading, we're talking about in the caucus or the primary process. Is this where you're looking at a campaign process? Yes. Okay. Yes. So the front loading is the issue of where states want to be at the front end of the campaign process, especially the primary process, right? Because the sooner you go as a state, right, time-wise, say we start in January of this year, we went through June, right, of the presidential campaign. The primaries, right, were in that 6-month period or so. As a state, if you go sooner, you front load in that process, that 6-month process, you come sooner, you get more candidates on the ballot, right? So at the beginning of the campaign, right? There were 17 Democrats trying to become the nominee for president. 2 months into it, after 3 or 4 or 5 primaries, right, you've weeded out 7 or 8 of those candidates. And so if you're a state that comes like Texas comes around in March, we don't see as many candidates to choose from as, say, New Hampshire saw, right? And so as a state, it's in your benefit to front load in the process, right? To get there sooner than later. We see states like California that comes along in June really unhappy because by the time it gets around to their primary, there may be only 2 or 3 candidates that have managed to make it that far. And so they get a lot less to pick from. So, you know, and the other thing too, there's a little bit of a party element that comes into play here, right? You go into a state that's a red state or a blue state, right? That's going to have an impact too on who is successful at what time, right? So it matters. Timing matters, right?